Those of you who know me well know that I like to experiment. I thought it'd be fitting to start out with my latest. I started this in North Carolina. I was at a restaurant with my brother, a Mexican restaurant, and the waitress came to our table and asked us what we wanted to eat, which was expected. And I handed her the menu and I said, "Surprise me." And she said, "Wait, really?" And I said, "Yeah, I like everything. I don't have any allergies. Surprise me." And I said, I'm preferring adventure over flavor today. So you bring me what you think I would want." Reluctantly, she took the menu and turned to my brother, hoping for some relief. And my brother looks at the menu and he looks at her, and looks at the menu and he looks at her and he says, "Yeah, me too." So she didn't get any help from him either. So she brought us pollo verde, a chicken in a green sauce. Something I never have chosen from the menu, even though it's a staple on Mexican menus. And it was really good, a very different flavor profile from the tacos or the fajitas that I would have gotten for myself normally. And it was a great experience. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The waitress, as she left, was very concerned. She had a couple of weirdos at her table, and she didn't seem like she really knew what to do with it. But by the time we got done, she checked in on us. We were all smiles. It was really good food and everything. She was kind of had a little bit of a skip in her step. My wife's favorite experience. So I started in North Carolina and drove to Washington, and so I was doing this the whole way. My wife's favorite experience was in Arizona. We were at an IHOP, and this young man comes to our table and asks us, and I go through the spiel of, surprise me. And he left the table kind of trepidatious. He wasn't quite sure. You could tell what he was going to do. But man, by the time he came back, he was just full of confidence. And he's like, "Okay, here's the tri-tip steaks and these loaded mashed potatoes, or loaded hash browns, and something else I don't remember, and tres leches pancakes." He put a feast in front of me. And he's like, "This is what I would get if I was eating today." I was like, "Okay." And so there's no way I could have eaten all of it. I ate some of everything, and it was really good, and had a good time with it. And he comes back to the table, and by the time he comes back at the end for the bill, he brings us the receipt, and he's just amped. He's just jazzed. He's just thoroughly enjoying this experience. And he's like, "Okay, you guys like adventure." So he writes down on the back of the receipt, he's like, "This is the address for a taco restaurant that I cook at night. You guys got to come." So I look across the table at April. He leaves the table. I look across the table at my wife, and she's like, yeah, let's do it." So assuming, we didn't have conflicting plans, and we didn't. So we show up at this taco restaurant, and it's one of those with the full glass front. You walk in, the register's right there at the entrance where you order and pay. And then there's, the kind of the sneeze guard station where they prepare your food. And if you want to be a creeper, you can stand there and watch them prepare your food, or you can go sit down like a normal person. So anyway, we enter the restaurant, and I leave April there at the register, and I had to go use the restroom. So I finish up, and I'm washing my hands, and I hear this, "Hey, where's your husband?" And I hear April respond, "Oh, he's in the bathroom. He'll be right out." And he says, "Oh, man, I can't believe you guys actually came." And he's just, if possible, even more excited than when we left him at IHOP. So he makes us food. It's really good food. We eat, and he comes out later with this lady, and he introduces us, and he's like, "This is my aunt. She owns the restaurant." And so he's introducing us, and he brings out this special dish. I don't know what it was, if it was an original or what, but it was full corn kernels in like a soup, and with a bunch of spices in it. It was really good. I don't know what it was, but it was really good. And he's like, "This is on the house." And he was just so excited that we showed up at this restaurant from some stranger that served us at IHOP. So this is what I've been doing. I figured I'd bring you up to speed on that. I was on a plane, November, flying out here, and I was seated next to Esmeralda and her husband. Esmeralda's husband was not talkative, partly why I don't know what his name was. But Esmeralda was very talkative, and she was a little bit of a nervous flyer, and so I think it comforted her to talk even more. So it was really clear she wanted to have a conversation. And really early in the conversation, it was also clear that she had no interest in speaking English. um, Spanish is her native language, and that's what she wanted to speak. And I'm always looking for opportunities to practice, so we talked the whole flight, pretty much. In the midst of that conversation, she asks me where I'd learned Spanish, and I tell her I took a couple years in high school, took a couple years in college, and I practice as I have the opportunity. And I explained kind of the limitations of that, and I said, well, the problem with the way I learned is my vocabulary is not that great. It's not very expansive, and sometimes I'll pick the wrong words. And I gave her an example that I've shared here before, and I've shared multiple times as this kind of topic comes up in conversation. And I told her that one time I was asking a lady for a broom, or intending to ask the lady for a broom, and I accidentally asked her for a witch. And I've told this story multiple times. I've never gotten the reaction I got out of Esmeralda. It surprised me. Because as soon as I said I accidentally asked for a witch, she grabbed my arm and said, "Los brujos en Veracruz son muy buenos." The witches in Veracruz are very good. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just finished my story, and then there was a lull in the conversation. But then I decided I just had to ask the question. So I said, "Esmeralda, what makes a good witch?" And she says, "Oh, well, a good witch can heal you, and a good witch can turn into animals." What kind of animals? She's like, "Well, a dog or a bird, really anything." And then another question popped into my head. I said, "Well, you say the witches in Veracruz are very good. What about the witches in the United States?" And the disdain she had for that question was revealed when she wouldn't even answer it with words. She just said, "Bah." And that wasn't enough. She had to do it twice. Bah. So, okay. What Esmeralda did for me that day, and kind of where I want to center the conversation, was she provided an identity of a good witch. A good witch can heal you and can transform into animals. So if this is how a good witch is defined, the identity of a good witch, what is your identity? How do you identify? If we really had to boil it down and you tell me who you are, how would you respond? I've been considering this, and if you got a handout today, the reason that there aren't any fill in the blanks is I didn't want you worrying about what I was going to say and if I said the right word and all of that, or I didn't even put references in there. I figured it might be helpful to start literally answering this question, to actually write it down as we go through this, because I'm going to break it down in several different methods that I went through as far as a thought process. So if you want to, go ahead and give a description. How do you identify? The first method that I used when I was trying to figure this out was kind of a raw data exploration. And I thought, maybe kind of in the vein of 20 questions, right? In this case, it's a little different because you ask a question and you provide answers until you get to a single identity. But I guess you could think of it also, our daughters had a game, I think it was called Guess Who, where there was like 40 or 50 pictures that you would see. It was like shoulders up, so you could see people with different color skin, different color hair, different jewelry, maybe they're different colored shirts, tie maybe. And what you would do is you would ask the other person a question like, does your character wear glasses. And each of you have an identity that you're trying to guess the other person's identity before they guess yours. And so it's a process of elimination. So you say, does your character wear glasses? And if not, then you flip down all the ones that are wearing glasses. And the idea is that you get to that singular identity before the other person does. So I guess you can kind of think of my process that way. And if you take the 20 questions literally, I guess I probably would have started out, I'm bigger than a toaster. But I didn't go quite that far. My first identity that I came up with was I'm human. And that doesn't seem like that eliminates a whole lot unless you consider the infinite expanse of space and matter. But there's 8.1 billion people on the planet. So that's not a great identity. So next logical step was kind of a male that cuts it in half. But then I thought, no, there's better than that. I can say, well, I'm a father. Because only, according to Google search, 22% of men are fathers. So that cuts it down to from 8.1 billion to about 1 billion. I'm a resident of Long Beach, Washington. There's barely over 7,000 of us there. And as a father, that brings me down to about 1,000. So you can kind of see how it doesn't take 20 answers to get down to a singular. But I thought about it and I thought, well, just on the data only, I'm going to get down to something like my fingerprint or my social security number or my dental records or something that doesn't really express who I am, does it? So I kind of dispatched with the raw data version and I thought, well, what's better? And I thought, well, maybe like characteristics, traits. Well, so I went down that route. So I'm a Pisces. I like going for barefoot runs on the beach now and again. I enjoy solving problems, puzzles and the like. And I thought, well, this is kind of sounding like a dating profile. And those, as I understand, don't work very well in dating apps and stuff. So I thought, well, if it doesn't work very well there, it's probably not going to work very well in what I'm trying to do here. So I thought, well, I need to pick a different method. And I thought, well, what if I didn't really just pick a method? What if I just asked myself, what's the most meaningful identity that I have? And the answer that I came up with was immediate. Well, I'm a Christian. And I sat with that for a while and I thought, there are a lot of people who would use that to define themselves in ways that I would be uncomfortable with. People who say I'm a Christian, not a judgment or anything, but that's a wide spectrum of people who would say that. And I don't think that really defines me in the way that I intend to. I didn't think it was specific enough. So I thought, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, I'm a follower of Jesus. And then I thought about that for a while, and I thought, well, how closely do I really follow? It's not like he takes one step and I step in that place. I think I'd be pretty encouraged if he looked over his shoulder and could see me before he sees the end of the horizon. And so it brought up all kinds of questions of, performance, I guess. What I landed on, my conclusion was, I'm a sinner who's been saved. And I thought at the most critical level of analysis, that's my identity. I'm a sinner who's been saved. The application of this whole journey that I was on to answer this question of who am I, or what is my identity, really, I guess, culminates in Matthew 22, where Jesus is asked, what is the greatest command in the law? And he says, love the Lord with all your heart and all your mind and all your strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. The love your neighbor as yourself part is the part that I'd really like to focus on. Because as I was going through this process, I came to another realization, and that is we really have, if we're not careful, we have two identities. We have the identity that we are to ourselves, and we have the identity that we express towards others. And I thought about how I do that, and I don't think I'm alone in this. I think this is pretty common, in that the way I identify myself to myself is really kind of all about regrets. Like when your head hits the pillow and you're thinking, nah, I really shouldn't have said that. Really shouldn't have done that. Those old memories of things that you've done that you wish you hadn't. And if I'm honest with myself and I really consider who I am, that's really kind of how I identify myself. It's kind of the if they only knew aspect. If they only knew who I really was, they wouldn't hang around. They'd be gone. They wouldn't invest the time into me if they really knew the things that I've done in my past. And then there's the other side. There's the side, our identity that we express outwardly towards others. I think the way that I think about that is like dating. Going on a date, you put on your best clothes, you're on your best behavior, you talk about things that put you in the best light, right? And that's maybe kind of the Facebook approach, right? The highlight reel. And as I was going through this process, it occurred to me that in order for an identity to be useful at all, to be accurate and representative, there can't be a gap between the internal and the external. And so I tested my conclusion out of, I'm a sinner who's been saved. And I had to ask myself, is that true internally? Do I believe that? Is that real? And I concluded that it was. And then I thought about my outward expression. Nobody's going to think I'm perfect. Everybody knows I'm a sinner. That's obvious. And that I've been saved, I'm not shy about my faith. So I said, okay, I think that works as an identity. And you look at this second important commandment that Jesus gave, love your neighbor as yourself. And I thought about the importance of this identity, what it really, I think, does for me, can do for us, is help us in our relation towards others. Because it's really easy to get into a us and them mentality, of those people kind of mentality in our lives. But if you're looking at the most critical level of analysis, and if you conclude as I do, or something similar, I'm a sinner who's been saved, then every other 8.1 person on the planet is either as you are or as you once were. Because everybody's a sinner. And either we've accepted the forgiveness Jesus offers us or we haven't. And it's a simple focus of how do we relate to others. And I think if we apply this principle of our true, most important identity, the most foundational identity that we have, to this love your neighbor as yourself, I think it stirs up, or it ought to stir up in us, a desire to engage. To engage in compassion to those who don't yet know the joy of their salvation. And grace towards fellow believers. Because I know I'm not perfect. Like I said, I'm not one step behind Jesus in my follow. How in the world can I expect my fellow believer to be in that position? And maybe I need to extend some grace. My hope is that, rooted in this identity, I'm propelled forward to good works that God has prepared for us. And this isn't all of us, right? This isn't all of who we are, a sinner who's been saved. God made us all unique and wonderful and strange. But it's a starting point that should launch us into engagement with those around us. And if we accept that as a premise, I think the next question is, how do we do that? For me, I ask waiters and waitresses really strange requests in restaurants. And I didn't do that by accident. There was intention behind it. Because I thought to myself, how do I engage, for example, with the stranger in a more meaningful way than I normally do? And I'd already asked previously for waiters and waitresses to bring me, I like dipping sauces for my French fries, my tater tots, whatever it is. And so I'd already asked for, what do you, bring me the dipping sauce you would recommend for these French fries, right? And I had on multiple occasions, the person would come to me with like 5. And they're like, well, this one is really good for the French fries because of the savory nature of it. This one's spicy and it works really well with tater. And they would just light up. And I thought, well, what if I could tap into that in all restaurant occasions? So now when I engage with a cashier or a waiter or waitress, I'm asking them this really odd favor of surprise me. And it's amazing the light that you see in people's eyes when you do something like that. And so if we're compelled to engage, the next question is how? And I'm not trying to propose that everybody goes out to their favorite restaurant and do this. Some people have allergies. Some people have very particular tastes. I'm a garbage dump. I eat everything. So that doesn't apply to me. I have the freedom to do that. But I suspect that we all have those attributes, those traits about us that can be engaging to others. My wife comes home from work one day, and she talks about a coworker who has just gotten dreadlocks. And my wife is talking about it, and she is just, her enthusiasm level is off the charts. She is just wide-eyed, and she's talking about all these different, she's like, I want to get dreadlocks. If you want to have it just in a high-intensity conversation with my wife, ask her about, not right now, but ask her about dreadlocks. Because she's on websites, and she's watching YouTube videos, and she's just on it. And her enthusiasm level just through the ceiling. And I think these opportunities are literally everywhere for us. To be that salt and light to the world around us. To be that fresh cup of water for people who are just stale in their lives, in their souls. Even just this morning, April and I stopped by McDonald's on our way here because we had, a 2+ hour drive to get here. So we stopped for breakfast, and the guy taking the order over the drive-through window, it was such a monotone. And as we're driving up, my wife's like, I forget exactly what she says, but he's not thrilled with life or something like that. And we encounter that every day, don't we? Where people are just at this static noise level. And every time we encounter that, there's an opportunity there. And we're not going to be able to fill the void entirely. But when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, if we start with the reality of they are either as we were or as we are, we can then ask the question, if I were in this situation, what would wake me out of my slumber? What would spark my interest? What would cheer me up? This message is not a deep theological message. If you were expecting that, so sorry. Not even close. It's intended to be a very simple, very practical reminder so that when somebody asks you for your ID, when somebody tells you their preferred pronouns, if you're watching Fox News or MSNBC and they start talking about identity politics, maybe those can be reminders of our most critical identity, the most important identity that we have. And just maybe that will spur us on to look for opportunities, to reach out, to engage with people in a way that sparks life. I'm not saying give a come to Jesus message with every encounter. I don't think that would be appropriate. I think you got to build relationship. But sometimes all you need in the day is just that little spark. And I'm not saying that this is an I'm okay, you're okay, we're okay, just go spread cheer to everyone. I'm not. In fact, if you look at Jesus, when he says, love your neighbor as yourself, he is quoting Leviticus 19:18. And Leviticus 19:17 talks about giving a firm rebuke to your neighbor. This isn't just about cheering people up. That's great. That's probably the more common interaction we ought to have. But there's also an opportunity and also a need sometimes for a firm rebuke, and an appropriate rebuke. I look back in my life and I know that there are some times when I've been put in my place in such a way that transformed my life. I remember lots of examples. One was I was probably 8 years old. My brother was 10. And I was trying to get away with something. And I didn't tell an outright lie. I didn't tell an untruth. I omitted a detail. And my brother, who's only two and a half years older than me, caught it. And he said, you know, Aaron, telling a lie isn't not just telling an untruth, but it's also not telling the truth. I was 8 years old. I still remember that to this day. I don't think I'll ever forget it. It was a critical learning moment. It was a rebuke from my brother that I needed badly because I had a very bad habit of lying and manipulating. I say this because it's important, it's proper, in a very specific context. The other thing that I want to share is that I want to give you the bad example of a rebuke. Because Jesus, talking with Peter and the disciples, is telling him about how he's going to be turned over to the officials, he's going to be beaten, he's going to die and raise 3 days later. And Peter says, no, never, it's not going to happen. And Peter rebuked Jesus inappropriately. And what was Jesus' response? Get behind me, Satan. So I don't say to rebuke your brother lightly. There are scriptures that tell you exactly how to do that, how to do it appropriately. And I would recommend fasting and prayer before you get to that point of confronting a brother or sister to the point where you have to rebuke them. The key here, I think, is, again, the compassion and the grace that we extend to those around us, knowing the most critical level of analysis, the most critical identity that we own is that we are sinners who have been very graciously saved. And an opportunity that gives us to reach out and love others as if they were ourselves, because at that level of analysis, they are. They're just another version of you at that level. And it maybe we can reach down and find something that's of value that we can present to them, to bless them and to help them in whatever their daily struggle happens to be. Heavenly Father, thank you for reaching out to us when we didn't deserve it, when we didn't know how to appreciate it. Thank you for being that, not just the fresh cup of water, but that living spring of water in our lives. Help us to move forward today in a very practical, very intentional, loving our neighbor kind of way, where we can be a blessing to those around us. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.